Hello everyone. I'd like to talk to you today about API testing in Karate. First, why Karate? And a bullet comparison with Cucumber. I'd like to tell you why I think Karate is the best suitable or fit framework for our API testing. Then, where you can find it. I'll show you where you can get it. Well, yesterday it was still there. Something in GitHub. I won't tell anymore. And I'll end my presentation with a demo with some code examples. And that's the remainder of my presentation and the biggest part. A little over a year ago, we had a lot of Fitnessa API tests, but I think Fitnessa can be a very good tool for testing, still is. But for API testing, there are better suitable tools. So I began my quest for the best API test framework for our API testing. I had a look at SoapUI. It has a very user-friendly GUI, but turned out to be very expensive to use. I had a look at Postman. Again, a very friendly GUI. It is free, but for the code reuse and therefore maintainability, it was a bit harder to do. Rest assured, it certainly earned its stripes. It has a big community, but compared to Karate, I think that is way more easy to read and to use. And of course, Cucumber. This is a comparison I have from the Karate website. The biggest difference with Cucumber, it uses Cucumber under the hood, Karate, is that Karate you only have the feature file. You don't need to do the glue coding in the step definition file, which is way more technical. So yeah, that's the only thing you need. Where you can get Karate is on GitHub. If you search for Intuit Karate, then you will find it. There's a lot of documentation there, very extensive. Code examples, demos. The comparison with Cucumber is also there. And there's also a comparison with Rest Assured. Furthermore, what you can find there is the setup folder structure you have to do to get it into your project. And a lot of reporting examples are there. But let's have a look at some examples as how we use it in our service. So this is the folder structure of our wiki service in this case. We have a subfolder at the top with wiki service Karate, and you will recognize the source and the test folders there. There's a main Karate which is at the moment running, so I can run my feature files. An example is on the right. And if you use this one, it will run all the feature files, which I'm not going to do it now. And here are all the feature files. I chose the same setup as for our API. So if you go to Swagger, then this looks very similar to the folder structure there. What is important is, for example, this file. Here you can distinguish between the environments. By default, we use the local host with a Docker container. This is also used within our builds. And the service URL you will see in the example feature file, which is used, but you can also talk to test or acceptance. This file is used for the content and acceptance types, application JSON in this case. But I also show you an example of a CSV import file, which uses text plain as the payload. Then let's run this file. So this is a complete feature file which is running now. It is very similar to running unit tests. If you make a change and you save it, then you can immediately run it again, and hopefully it will be green the second time. With some print statements, you can print some outcome responses, like here the local host, but also here responses as you have in Swagger. If I have a closer look at how the feature file is built up, then you first have a background. This will run every time when a scenario is run. And in this case, it's a scenario outline, the first one, which means there is an examples section at the bottom with, in this case, 11 test cases which will run. So it's really data-driven, and every time an article, in this case, is created in our database. Furthermore, there are some other scenarios. We add some contacts, and we do some other stuff. We do some checking if it actually is created what we're trying to create. And at the end, we do a cascade delete to clean up everything. If we look at this file more in more detail, then first you see here an headers. That's a variable. This is read from the myheaders.js file I showed you earlier. And here's, again, the service URL file. In this case, this uses localhost. And here are some URLs which we use in our scenarios, which will be appended to the service URL. If you then first look at this first scenario, it says, here's some Gherkin language, given path, import article path. This will be appended to the service URL, so that is the complete path it will use. And request payload, that is this payload over here, which is placed in a variable. When I post something, I expect a status 200. So this payload, you can do the same in Swagger actually. It expects some values. This article ID, which is a number in this case, will be replaced by this number here. So this will be used in the payload then. And here is a string with the single quotes and the country, and all the other columns which are in the example section are used for this payload. Even some empty values are possible to use for the image URL in this case. So after this, it will check if everything is inserted. This is done in this one, the next scenario, which is a combination of a query and a payload, which are used here. We're not going to use caching because we want to see what is actually created in the database. And the payload, which is over here. As you can see here, there are far more columns in the example section, and only 3 are there in this section for the payload. That is because the other columns here are reused to actually check the response. And that is different from the other scenario. Here we're doing some matching on what is actually created in the database. So there's a match on here, the title for the first one, and the description. This is the karate way to say, well, it is optional, so it can be empty in the response, but if it's there, then it should be this description. For the image URL, it's also optional, because in the creation section, we had some empty image URLs. And if it's there, it's a regex, which starts with HTTPS, yada yada, something with NL. You can also here have something like hash string or hash number or hash boolean if the actual value is not really important you're looking for, but you only want to check if it's a numeric or a string value you get returned. So then for the cascade delete, the different thing there is that we check here, we get with these elements here what we just created. Again, of course, there's an example file here. And what we do then is, from the response, we store the ID in a variable, which we then use in this delete to actually delete everything which is under there. So that's also something you can do, store a value in a variable. When I started my presentation, I said something about a comma-separated file. That is actually this one. This imports shelf data from the CSV file I just showed you. As you can see, everything is green again. And here you see that, again, the headers is here, but now it's the my import headers which is used, which said text plain instead of application JSON. And the payload is read from this file, which is the CSV file. So that's also possible to use. Not only JSON is something you can match the response with, but also XML. This scenario, for example, checks on an error response. So it's not only happy scenarios you can use. And what I just did was not run the complete feature file, but only one scenario. That's also possible. And it actually checks on this code, and that it checks this message, not a valid type category. Of course, in responses you have sometimes blocks which you get back of the same information. In this case, you get category information for a certain country, and it is important that ID 1 is in the first block and ID 2 is in the second block. So this is green, but I'll show you what happens if it's not green. There you go. So now it's not green anymore. You see a lot of exclamation marks here. And here is where it goes wrong. And that's also in the response. Here's the exception. And this is where it says, this is here. Block 1, actual is this one. And I expected something else, namely this one. So this is how error response look like. If I just do it like this and run it again, it should be green again. And there it is. Let me show you one more thing. Also something you can do, a not contains. Sometimes you want in a response to check that something is definitely not there because it's not good if it's there. You can put an exclamation mark in front of the contains, and then you can see that it's not there. I will show you. There you go. So everything is green again. So this first group doesn't contain this, the content ID, and the second group does contain this because that is one of the things we want to check on. Okay, and that concludes my code examples of my presentation. Thank you for your attendance.